What does it actually take to start raiding Savage content? Is it genuinely a huge DPS requirement and the need to play the optimal jobs, as well as tons of mechanics? Or maybe it is just about the mechanics, and the damage comes with practice. In this video, I will be looking at two extremely impressive Savage raid passes, namely for P1S and P4S, only phase 1. But instead of looking at them to see how much damage you can do, I wish to look at them to use them as an upper bound, and then compare that to how much damage the enrage timers mean that you have to do, to show you how much more damage you could produce with perfect optimization, just to underline the simple fact that Savage raiding is not about perfection, but about respecting the encounter and mastering it, and then the damage to defeat it comes after. I should make it abundantly clear that tools like FFLogs depend on third-party tools, and that the official stance on this subject is that third-party tools are illegal, so whether you choose to use any of them is done at your own risk. In this video, we will merely be looking at data produced and put in FFLogs, and I will not be using any of these tools myself. Now, let's first take a look at P1S. Erichthonius has shy of 24 million HP, and after 10 minutes, he has had enough of you and enrages, immediately wiping the party. What this means is that to defeat Erichthonius before he gets bored, your party needs to do around 39.7 thousand DPS combined. That is the bare minimum. Now, the fastest recorded kill at the making of this guide, shortly before 6.2 release, took 6 minutes and 19 seconds, and had a combined 62.8 thousand DPS. That is quite a lot more than your average group. However, your average group is probably not perfectly coordinated, especially not when still learning the fight. In fact, your average group might take so much damage that your healers might have trouble finding time to attack regularly. So let's imagine this super party's healers did 0 damage. And then what if the limit break was instead a healer or tank limit break, so that damage is also lost? In fact, what if everyone in the raid did 23% less DPS for a multitude of reasons, like weakness from deaths, unoptimized cooldowns from still learning the fight, not yet having optimal item level and gear, and so on? Even with all those stipulations, they would still be doing 39.8 thousand DPS, still enough to win. Let's take a different perspective. The in-game way of determining whether you can produce enough DPS to defeat a Savage raid boss is to defeat the appropriate striking dummy in the Stone Sky Sea area within the time limit. Often, you will find if you are capable, then you can not only defeat this dummy, but defeat it with time to spare. This is usually because when a boss does not mess up your rotation with inconveniences like boss mechanics, most jobs can do much more damage than they otherwise would. Although of course, the optimization in mastering a boss fight is to learn to work around it. When should the Black Mage use triple cast to never stop casting, and so on. However, for the sake of example, here's the minimum DPS required of each job to defeat their appropriate striking dummies in exactly the 3 allotted minutes. If we add all those together, we are just shy of enough damage. However, this number assumes you are alone, and for each role represented in a party, you get an increasing party bonus which ultimately gives you 5% more of your primary stat, increasing your potential DPS by somewhere around that same amount. Now watch this. If we increase this combined minimum DPS by just 3%, it is enough to beat the boss in time. This does not even include the fact that many of the jobs in this example give raid-wide damage bonuses that the rest of the party will also benefit from, making it even easier to do enough damage. You may have noticed that the striking dummy suggests a higher DPS, relatively speaking, than what is shown in the Parse example. Well, some jobs are affected more or less by boss mechanics, so by showing that you can do more damage when no mechanics are present, you are proving that you can do the required damage once the boss forces you to move around. This is more significant for the Monk and Black Mage jobs, as one loses DPS much faster by just being out of range for a single second, while the other can lose DPS by having to run a lot. Of course, one thing you should not take away from this is that healers can get away with not attacking. Every single attack a healer decides to throw at the boss eases the burden of the DPS, who already has to give it all they've got. Now, for the second example, we are looking at just phase 1 of P4S. This is simply because the combination of HP amounts and enrage timers make the DPS requirement of phase 1 tighter than phase 2. So while the second phase might be a lot more mechanically intense, phase 1 is more relevant to what we are trying to demonstrate in this video specifically. Now, Hesperos has, well, you need to do around 20.8 million HP of damage, which is just about half of his HP, before phase 2 begins. If you don't do this before 7 minutes and 12 seconds have passed, you lose. This puts our raid-wide DPS requirement at 48.2 thousand. Once again, we have the fastest Parse as an example, beating it in 5 minutes and 31 seconds with a combined 63.1 thousand DPS. Once again, we can remove the healer's damage output and the limit break and still have 52,000. This time, the margin for error is a lot smaller but still manageable. We can reduce the damage by 7% and still have enough damage to get it done in time. The primary reason why this margin is a lot smaller is because the item level expectation of this fight is significantly higher than P1 is. Because it is expected that you might have several gear pieces from the previous fights already, and both of these passes are of course created in perfectly optimized gear. Let's again take the Stone Sky Sea perspective. If everyone does the bare minimum necessary to beat their striking dummy in time, we're again some thousands DPS short. If we did 9% more, we would be doing 48.3 thousand, just barely enough to make it. Remember, around 5% of that is just from being in a balanced party, and the remaining 4% could come from raid buffs throughout, as well as food buffs and tinctures. What I mean to prove with both of these examples is twofold. First, that you do not have to be perfect to be able to do savage raiding, and what skill you will need comes with practice. Second, as long as your party is somewhat balanced, there is no such thing as a job that is too weak to do savage raiding. Now remember that a balanced party includes 2 different tanks, 2 different healers, preferably 1 pure and 1 barrier, 1 melee DPS, 1 mage and 1 ranged physical, meaning machinist, dancer or bard. The last slot is a freebie DPS slot, but savage bosses tend to expect that slot to be a melee DPS, so your best option is to satisfy that. For each duplicate job in your raid, the slower your limit break charges, and having duplicate jobs can also cause problems with overlapping raid buffs that don't stack. On the other hand, missing specific roles, namely in the DPS department, can result in 1 to 2% loss of DPS for everyone. A party playing to the strengths and weaknesses of the party composition they do have can also make the party shine brighter than they would if you don't try to play around it. Examples include other DPS jobs or even healers and tanks picking up and dealing with mechanics in place of a black mage whenever possible, allowing the black mage to get more attacking uptime, especially during ley lines. Another example is if your party happens to be particularly barren on raid buffs, then some jobs can produce slightly more damage than they otherwise would, by not delaying anything for the raid burst window that is not coming. Certain strategies on bosses can also optimize better around certain compositions, and understanding how to play to the strengths of different jobs and party compositions makes you a much stronger player as a whole, both in savage raids but also in things like regular duty roulettes. I really hope you found this inspiring and maybe gave you the assurance that you needed to give it a shot with savage raiding yourself. Or at the very least, I hope you found the information interesting, and if you did, consider leaving a like. Thank you for watching. Remember that you can subscribe and bonk the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you have any questions or anything to add, please do leave a comment down below. Fun fact, you may know that just like FF logs, there exists Warcraft logs, which is the exact same thing for World of Warcraft. The fact that the websites look almost perfectly exactly identical should not be too surprising, considering the people behind them both are the same.